Michael Landon built a legacy on morality, on love, on being the man everyone could trust. On screen, he was a father to millions. In Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven, he stood for everything decent. Gentle words, strong values, simple truths. But behind the camera, things were different. His control was absolute, his temper unspoken, his personal life complicated and messy. And, near the end of his life, something shifted. The man who had always crafted his own myth, who chose how every story ended, could no longer rewrite his own. Because when the truth finally caught up with him, it wasn't the one fans had imagined. By the time Bonanza premiered in 1959, Michael Landon was already used to reinvention. Born Eugene Orowitz in Forest Hills, New York, he had changed his name, his look, and his entire future. He had once been a struggling track athlete with a troubled home life. His childhood was marked by emotional instability. His mother battled mental illness, and Landon himself struggled with anxiety that manifested physically. But when he stepped into the role of Little Joe Cartwright, none of that was visible. Landon was charming, loyal, quick-witted. He connected with audiences instantly, especially women, and quickly became one of the most popular faces on television. His rise wasn't accidental. Landon was ambitious, driven, and deeply aware of how television shaped public perception. After Bonanza, he moved into even greater creative control with Little House on the Prairie, a show that combined wholesome family drama with moral lessons and simple storytelling. But Landon wasn't just acting. He was also the show's writer, director, and executive producer. He worked relentlessly. Colleagues described 12-hour days, tight deadlines, and a strict sense of discipline on set. He pushed for emotional authenticity, especially in the child actors, and expected absolute commitment. For the audience at home, none of that mattered. They saw Charles Ingalls, the devoted husband, the father who would walk miles for his daughters, the man who would always do the right thing. That image stuck. By the time Highway to Heaven launched in the mid-'80s, Landon had fully stepped into the role of spiritual guide. As Jonathan Smith, a literal angel sent to Earth, Landon once again played a character who helped others find redemption and healing. It was a role he wrote for himself. It was also a reflection of what he wanted to be remembered for. And it worked. To this day, many fans remember Michael Landon as one of the most honorable men ever to appear on television. His shows were clean. His characters had integrity. His presence comforted an entire generation. But while America saw a moral icon, those who worked closest with him saw something else, someone more complicated, more conflicted, and not always kind. And behind that smiling face was a man holding on tightly to a world he couldn't control forever. As Michael Landon's star power grew, so did his control. By the time Little House on the Prairie was in full swing, he wasn't just the lead actor. He was the driving force behind the entire production. He wrote the scripts. He directed the episodes. He called the shots, on and off set. And in many ways, he was the show. This level of authority wasn't accidental. Landon had a vision for what television could be. He wanted to tell stories about family, forgiveness, and faith. But more importantly, he wanted control over how those stories were told. Cast and crew members spoke of how Landon ran his set with precision. There was a schedule, and everyone stuck to it. There was a tone, and everyone followed it. That discipline made the show one of the most consistent and well-oiled productions on television. It also made it a difficult environment for those who didn't fall in line. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, would later describe the power imbalance she felt on set. She spoke openly about being underpaid compared to her male co-stars, and how Landon resisted renegotiating her contract even as the show's success soared. She felt dismissed, unheard. She wasn't alone. Other actors recalled how Landon could be charming one moment, distant the next. His high standards left little room for disagreement. If someone challenged his vision, they were often shut out or written off. Scripts were sometimes altered to reduce the presence of actors he wasn't getting along with. Scenes were rewritten to recenter the focus on Charles Ingalls. If Landon felt that a storyline no longer served his purpose or his image, it was gone. But it wasn't just about ego. Landon's control came from something deeper: fear. The same boy who had watched his home fall apart as a child had grown into a man determined never to feel that powerless again. On set, he was the protector of his own world. And when that world was threatened by conflict, by emotion, by unpredictability, he tightened his grip. There was a duality to him. He would bring donuts to set, laugh with the children, and check in on struggling cast members. But those moments didn't always last. When emotions flared or trust was broken, Landon pulled back. He didn't yell. He withdrew. The atmosphere shifted, and everyone knew it. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura, later reflected on how much she admired Landon but also feared disappointing him. As a child, she saw him as a father figure. As she grew older, she began to see the full complexity of the man guiding her career. He was kind, but not always gentle. Supportive, but not always fair. Present, but not always open. Despite the tensions, no one could deny his talent. He knew how to make television that mattered. He shaped stories that touched people. And he built a legacy that defined family drama for an entire generation. But that legacy came at a cost. His need for perfection, his refusal to be challenged, and his resistance to vulnerability created a distance between the man he was and the man fans believed in. And it wouldn't be the last time his personal struggles would bleed into the work he tried so hard to protect. For all the order Michael Landon imposed on his professional world, his personal life was far less controlled. Behind the image of the dependable father and devoted husband was a man wrestling with impulses that didn't fit the roles he played on screen. During his years on Bonanza, Landon began to drink. Quietly at first, then more heavily. He never allowed it to interfere with filming, but those close to him began to see the signs. He used alcohol to cope with pressure, to ease anxiety, to fill a silence he rarely acknowledged. He was successful, admired, and in complete control. On set, but off set, he struggled to find peace. His first marriage, to Dodie Levy-Fraser, ended in divorce after 6 years. His second, to Lynn No, lasted nearly 2 decades and produced 4 children. To the public, they were a picture-perfect family. Photos from the 70s show the Landons smiling on red carpets, vacationing at the beach, posing in family spreads for magazines. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. In the early 80s, Landon began a relationship with Cindy Clerico, a much younger makeup artist, working on Little House on the Prairie. At the time, he was still married to Noe. The affair became tabloid fodder almost immediately. For a man whose career had been built on values, the fallout was severe. Fans were shocked. Longtime viewers felt betrayed. Headlines painted him as a hypocrite. When Landon left Lynn for Cindy, it wasn't just a divorce, it was a rupture. His family life splintered. His older children were hurt and angry. His youngest children struggled to understand. And Landon, who had always been the one to write the endings to his stories, suddenly found himself at the center of one he couldn't control. He didn't deny the affair. In public interviews, he defended his choice. He spoke of falling in love, of feeling alive again. But there was an edge to his words, a defensiveness that hinted at guilt. He had made his decision, and he lived with the consequences. Cindy would later become his third wife, and they remained together until his death. But the damage left behind lingered. Some friends noticed that after the divorce, Landon became more withdrawn. He was still a professional, still hardworking, still producing content. But the joy that had once marked his presence on set seemed harder to find. The moral clarity of Little House gave way to the more spiritual tone of Highway to Heaven, where forgiveness and redemption took center stage. Those who knew him best say the change wasn't just in the scripts, it was in the man himself. He began to confront the ways he had hurt others. He talked more openly about his own failings. And while he never publicly apologized for the affair, those close to him sensed he carried regret. He wanted to be a better father. He tried to rebuild bridges with the children who had pulled away. But some wounds don't heal quickly. And some reputations, once damaged, are never quite the same. For fans, the betrayal was hard to reconcile. They had believed in Charles Ingalls. They had seen Landon as the moral compass of American television. To learn that he had walked out on his family felt like losing something personal. But Michael Landon was never just one thing. He wasn't just Charles, or Joe, or Jonathan. He was a man who made mistakes, who chased passion, who ran from discomfort, and in doing so, he left behind a trail of both admiration and pain. And as his life began to wind down, he would finally start to face everything he had spent so many years avoiding. In April of 1991, Michael Landon was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was already advanced. The disease had spread to his liver. And for a man who had always seemed invincible, the news came as a shock not just to the public, but to Landon himself. He had never been one to show vulnerability. Whether on screen or off, Landon held himself together with purpose. He kept moving. He kept producing. He kept building stories where goodness won and pain had meaning. But this time, the story wasn't his to write. Just a few weeks after his diagnosis, Landon went on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He didn't hide the truth. He spoke plainly about the cancer. He smiled. He made jokes. But something in his demeanor had changed. Gone was the polished control. In its place was a quiet honesty, a man coming to terms with the one thing he couldn't direct. He talked about his children, about wanting to spend as much time with them as he could, about how he believed in staying positive. But even in that moment, surrounded by applause and familiar faces, there was an undercurrent of finality. He knew what was coming. And for once, he couldn't protect anyone from it. Those close to him noticed a shift in his final months. He was softer, more introspective. He spent more time at home with Cindy and their 2 children. He tried to reconnect with the older children he had hurt. There were quiet conversations, long walks on the beach, unfinished apologies. His youngest daughter, Jennifer, later recalled how her father sat her down and told her exactly what was happening. He didn't sugarcoat it, he wanted her to be prepared. He didn't want to disappear without an explanation. That had always been one of his greatest fears, leaving without closure. Despite the illness, Landon never stopped trying to be strong. He worked on a new television project in the early stages of his diagnosis, hoping to keep telling stories until the very end. But his health declined quickly. The energy that had once defined him began to fade. By June, just 2 months after his public announcement, he was in and out of treatment, struggling to eat, losing weight rapidly. He died on the 1st of July at his home in Malibu, surrounded by family. And just like that, the man who had once brought millions of viewers comfort in their living rooms was gone. The public mourning was immediate. Newspapers published tribute covers. Television networks aired retrospectives. Co-stars shared memories. Viewers across the country wrote letters and sent flowers, mourning a man they felt they had known all their lives. But beneath the tributes was something more complicated, a reckoning with the person Michael Landon had truly been. Some remembered him for the strength of his convictions. Others couldn't forget the pain he had caused. There was love. There was disappointment. There was gratitude. There was grief. And perhaps that was his final gift, reminding people that even those who seem larger than life are still human, still flawed, still afraid of leaving things unsaid. In the end, he didn't fight the truth anymore. He accepted it. And for a man who had spent decades shaping his story, that was the most honest ending of all. After Michael Landon's death, something unexpected happened. The stories didn't stop. They multiplied. Fans clung to their memories of him as Charles Ingalls, the gentle patriarch who always knew what to say, as Jonathan Smith, the quiet angel who brought hope to strangers, as Little Joe Cartwright, the spirited son who lit up every scene. His characters remained on television long after he was gone, airing in reruns, comforting a new generation the way they had once comforted their parents. But alongside the nostalgia came reflection. His co-stars began to share more openly. Some described him as generous and encouraging. Others, like Karen Grassel, spoke of resentment, of power dynamics that never balanced out. These weren't scandals, they were human accounts. Honest memories of a man who could be both inspiring and difficult, tender and controlling, loving and distant. His children, too, were left with a complex inheritance. Publicly, many spoke with deep love for their father, but privately, some struggled with the shadows he left behind. Michael Jr., Leslie, and Cheryl were already adults when the affair with Cindy unfolded. Their family fractured in full view of the media. Years later, they would speak about the confusion, the anger, the forgiveness that never came quickly. Jennifer Landon, one of his youngest, followed him into acting. She won multiple Daytime Emmy Awards, and in interviews, she often mentioned her father's influence. But even she acknowledged that the man fans adored wasn't always the man she lived with. He was present, but complicated, loving, but not always easy to reach. In the years since, Landon's image has continued to evolve. Biographies and retrospectives have tried to make sense of him. Some paint him as a television pioneer who brought warmth to a cynical industry. Others point to the iron grip he held on his productions and the cost of maintaining that control. Even the network executives who once worked with him admitted that Landon was a rare kind of star, one who delivered results but refused to follow anyone's lead. He wrote his own rules, and when they no longer served him, he rewrote them. Yet, through it all, the audience has largely stayed loyal. Because for many, Michael Landon was more than an actor. He was a symbol of safety, of values, of stability, in a world that often felt too fast and too cold. His shows weren't just entertainment. They were rituals, family gatherings, life lessons, dressed in prairie skirts and angel wings. That emotional imprint is hard to erase. It's what keeps people watching Little House on the Prairie today. It's what brings fans to visit the show's filming locations decades later. It's what leads people to say, even now, that Michael Landon felt like family. But perhaps the greatest truth about Landon's legacy is this: he was both the myth and the man. He gave the world stories about honesty while hiding his own struggles. He preached forgiveness while wrestling with his past. He comforted millions while carrying pain he rarely showed. And maybe that's why his story still matters. Not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. Because somewhere between Charles Ingalls and the real man behind the camera, there was someone trying to love, to lead, to live up to the image he helped create. And in that gap between who he was and who we believed him to be, the real story begins. Michael Landon didn't live a perfect life. He made decisions that hurt people. He chased control in places where it couldn't protect him. He tried to be strong when he needed to be honest. And for years, he buried parts of himself so deep that even those closest to him couldn't always see the full picture. But he also gave millions of people something to believe in. He brought morality into mainstream television without cynicism. He reminded viewers that goodness, family, and forgiveness still mattered, even if he was still trying to understand those things himself. He didn't always live up to the characters he played. But maybe that's why people loved him. Because behind the script, behind the camera, behind the smile, he was human. And in the end, it wasn't just the roles that made him unforgettable. It was the way he kept trying, even when the lights dimmed. For more emotional stories, check out this video.